The worst thing you can say is, I don't know, I'm just the driver. Okay, that's one of the most common responses that I get from professional pilots. That is not the thing to say to the FAA. I have no idea they just pay me and I fly. Those are not the correct answers.
That's John Clark, aviation attorney and chief counsel for Jet RVSM.
The best thing to do is say, as far as I know, we're on a business trip for so-and-so, and these are the passengers, hosted by the company. Some answer like that is a solid answer. And then if the paperwork doesn't look right, say, woo, that, look surprised.
On this episode, John explains the flight department company trap and why it matters to professional pilots. Max and I will give some relationship advice to an airline pilot, and we'll share another funny story from the road.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show. It's the show for the pros. My name is Dylan, and I have 4.6 hours in a Phenom 100.
That's an incredible accomplishment, Dylan. Episode 45. Let's dive right in.
Yes, Max. Let's start with Aspen.
How's your Aspen?
Yeah, that's right. I haven't been Aspen in a long time, actually. You probably haven't either.
No, I've been there in like a couple years, but
yeah.
What's the story in Aspen?
They are now requiring a negative COVID test to go in. So if you've got passengers that you're going to be taking in there, they're going to have a test. I think it's going to be similar to kind of what Hawaii's doing and Alaska and some of these other states. So
very familiar.
Yes. So heads up on that one. But I think there's still kind of information developing. I haven't seen any definitive information yet about if you're a flight crew, if you have to have anything, or if it's just mostly for your passengers. But just a heads up. Another heads up. Did you see what Starbucks is doing for professional pilots and flight attendants?
Besides taking copious amounts of their money on the reg?
Yeah. Well, a little less money this month because they're doing a full first responders get a free cup of coffee program for December, and pilots and flight attendants are on the list of first responders. So,
God, I wonder how many captains have tried to be the hero and be like, oh, listen, guys,
yeah.
Coffee's on me.
Yeah, I got it.
And brings the release or something, be like, here's all the crew, tries to get it for free and brings back, and he's the hero till everyone figures it out.
Everybody give me your crew badge for just a minute.
Just real quick. Just that they require for the discount, 10%. Every penny counts.
So, yeah. So I can imagine that's going to be, knowing flight crews, they never abuse those kind of things. So I'm sure it'll be a great program, which Starbucks will be excited to continue into the new year. And then finally on what we've been up to, V-Base. Do you know what that is, Max?
I do. That's about the extent of my knowledge, though. I know it exists. I know you've been intimately involved, though, as usual.
Intimately involved with every step. So, of course, as folks in business aviation know, our biggest conference every year is the NBAA Base Conference they have. This year it was supposed to be in Orlando, but they had to go virtual. So we did a little virtual NBAA conference and got to cruise around via this. They have these interactive booths you could go to. So you'd log in and then be like, oh, you can kind of cruise around and, oh, there's a interesting company, and you could go in and click around and check it out. So it was definitely different. And
was there a virtual fuel party at Hakkasan where you just kind of fist pumped in your computer?
Oh my gosh. Sometime we'll have to tell. We went to it was Av Fuel last year. We went to in Vegas.
It was at Dre's, yeah.
Dre's, yeah. Yeah, I don't think they did that. So hopefully all of the vendors are just rolling all that money into next year's Vegas.
Yeah, right. There's going to be some real A-list acts at the parties, I'm sure.
That's right. So anyway, V-Base, they ran it. There was some helpful information, some good online tools there. You know what I did secretly was apply on all the giveaways. And so there was some good swag being given away, and it was kind of hard to apply. You kind of had to click around a while. So I'm hoping not many people did it, so that my odds are going to be really good, because let's face it.
When are the results going to be posted?
Hopefully soon. I haven't seen anything yet. So, I mean, who doesn't need another flight safety zip up jacket, or
Is that what's that really on there?
Or a nice Av Fuel cooler? I mean, come on. Shout out Av Fuel.
What else?
That's about it from VBase. It was just a couple days long. Like I said, better than nothing, and definitely, a sign of the time. So I think we're all excited, hopefully, for next year for things to get back to normal, hopefully in Vegas. We'll be there. Should we do I was thinking we should do a live show or something next year.
Yeah. Well, let's just take it one step at a time. Let's just make sure that it's going to happen before we get too excited. I feel like that's what I've done with ski season so far. I'm so excited. And now there's 1, no snow, and 2, who knows what's going to happen. So
water ski season.
Just take it one day at a time, Yeah, water skis, slush ski season. In other news, I get to hit a sound effect myself. I've been warned. Shot across the bow came this week from my airline. So we'll see what happens. It's in April, so that's an eternity these days. And my attitude remains the same, of not worrying about things that you cannot control. So I will wait and see what happens.
How many airmen took the horn?
1,200 and something.
Man. And that's the first time they've ever sent out a warn notice or done anything. So,
I don't know that to be 100% true. I think very early on, at the very beginning of the airline, there was some sort of furlough notice sent out, but in any sort of recent history, of course, that's pretty unprecedented. So,
yep. Well, fortunately, you have a lot of good perspective, I think. It's been so good over this year to have all these conversations with people, and talk to James, and talk to these furloughed pilots, and find out that really the only thing that you can control is your attitude, like you said. So
that's it. That, and preparing for the possibility of having to seek other employment, which obviously, as everyone knows, I'm in a little bit different situation, as I preemptively took a different job and took the leave just because I had the opportunity. But, so it's easy for me to sit here and say, oh, I'm just not going to worry about it. I get it. So don't everybody write in and message me on LinkedIn, because I'm very self-aware. I get it. But either way, my attitude would be the same if things were different, where it's just keep your head down and control what you can.
But I got to tell you, Max, just in our little neck of the woods, we're seeing a lot of opportunity pop up in business aviation. So it is encouraging.
My good friend, Ken Casey, you all know from episode 1, talking to him yesterday, things are crazy right now on the buy side. People, because of the new administration and the fear of losing some of the tax benefits next year of purchasing a private jet, there is a mad rush for purchasing airplanes right now. And there is very little inventory. It's all picked through. And then even if you do find a jet to buy, it's very, very difficult to get it into pre-buy. And these all have to close by the end of the year, which is rapidly approaching. So airplanes need pilots, and people are buying up all the ones that are out there. So that is the good news. If you do have especially if you have some business aviation experience and some relevant type ratings, and, I think that there's opportunity between now and the end of the year for sure of airplanes. So in our local market too, we've seen a number of jobs.
Here's a little free tip for those of you following along at home. If you haven't started networking with aircraft salespeople in your local area, you should start doing it right away. Those are the folks that know about jobs that are possible jobs that are in the pipeline, because they know the deals that are coming.
Yeah, most importantly, they're the ones that know about possible jobs first.
Yeah,
because a lot of times the timing is so very important, and money spent buying an airplane broker lunch will not be in vain. Let's just say that.
No. Yes, that has been one of the best. It could be
some of the highest return on investment that you can make.
Yeah. All right. Next topic. Every show, we do the same thing. We run around in circles. The latest on the COVID vaccine. Max, so we published our last episode, 2 weeks ago, when we've received messages from, I think, 3 or 4 different listeners with different information on what they've heard. All of them are conflicting. I don't want to necessarily report any false information, but what my point is here is there's a lot of questions right now and uncertainty. And
well, they were all sourced from representatives at the FAA, different, regions and stuff like that. The answer is, in my opinion, I guess all we can speak for is what we're going to do, right? Because this is the one thing we talk about on the show that actually affects every professional pilot. Sometimes we talk about LOAs, that is really only for business aviation, and we talk about unions, and that's only for other segments. This is one thing that affects every single professional pilot listening to this, because everybody is expected to, and I'm sure anticipating getting the vaccine once you're able to. And I think what we've seen is a bunch of conflicting information from different sources within the FAA, and clearly the FAA is going to have to publish some sort of guidance on this, right?
Yes. I was actually talking with one of our listeners yesterday. Shout out to Richie, who gave us some info from one of the infectious diseases folks at the FAA. And they were indicating that there's going to be some meetings here in the coming days, in internal meetings with the FAA, and that they're still kind of talking about what they're going to do. But it sounds like some official guidance is going to be released, because that's the problem. There's no official guidance yet. And so, we've heard, if you take the vaccine, you might have to self-ground for 2 weeks, or, as long as there's no effects, you're fine. Or some are saying, no, the FAA is going to specifically approve it. We don't know. No one knows yet. We heard back from Harvey Watt that, they advise, they say, look, there's not enough information out there right now. They don't recommend any pilots take it yet until we have a lot clearer guidance. So the other thing that was crazy too was that a lot of the information we got said, the FAA is not going to say anything heads or tails about vaccines. That's your business. And as long as you have no negative effects, you're fine. And I'm like, well, that's kind of risky to me, because what if you do have negative effects, then what? So
and it's the same guidance that we've learned through this whole medical journey we've been on since we started this show, is that seek advice, whether that's if you go to the doctor for something weird and to make that call, if you have the resources available, like we talk about with Harvey Watt or AMAS or whatever you have at your disposal. But 2, just don't jump the gun on stuff. Again, get guidance, call before you do something, or at least have some hard guidance from the feds. And so, like we said, all you can do is control what we're going to do. And, I think we're unanimous in that we're not going to take any vaccine until there's hard guidance from the feds on what exactly the ruling is. Because the other thing, too, you read about these vaccines, and it's not like a one-shot flu shot deal where majority of people don't experience many side effects besides maybe a little sore shoulder and a red spot. I mean, this one, they fear some of the vaccines are required 2 doses, right? And there are fears that a lot of people won't return for the second one because of some of the side effects from the first one.
I hadn't read that. Yeah,
I think that this vaccine can have more significant side effects than I think that we're used to. So again, I'm sure the FAA will have their 2 cents on that.
Yeah, one last thing I'll mention is one of the AMEs had mentioned that, the first round is probably going to be going to healthcare professionals anyways, but they're projecting that basically by the time they roll it out here mid-December and give that first round, it looks like it'll be about 1 million people. That's just what one source was saying. But they'll have basically 1 million people's worth of data in the first month. So pilots probably wouldn't be eligible in that first month anyways. So there might be, there will be more data out there. But anyways, we'll continue to monitor it.
I was going to say, one other thing I wanted to add while we're on the topic of medical, I just got my medical last week. And one of the things that I've done is, again, from learning kind of how this whole thing works, is block 60 is where you mark if you've ever been in the hospital or had a surgery. You know what I'm talking about? So I made where you a lot of times report the same thing and write whatever and then say previously reported no change, right? So I have a document where I write my block 60 comments in and I copy and paste it every time, because I think the thing is that nobody really they don't look that closely at that stuff. And then if something happens though, or you have a medical event, and then they go back and look at your applications and there's inconsistencies there. So I started a document one with all my block 60 comments that I have, which is like 3 from like knee surgeries and, stuff like that. And I copy and paste it exactly as my AME had advised me to do it. So every time it's the exact same thing on every one of my medical applications. And then the other thing is all your visits in the last 3 years. Is all your medical visits is I keep in the same document. I just write down because every time you fill that out and you're like short on time and you can't remember when you saw the doctor for what, even if it's just a physical. So, which is what almost all mine are, but I always put in there, eye doctor checkups, all that stuff. I just put in there. And so that way it's always consistent. And then because you have to put the same one for 3 years of your medical, right? So that way it's always the same thing. So everything looks very, very uniform. So I've been in the last couple of years trying to clean that up. So if they ever look at my medical application, my MedExpress, application history, it's very, very uniform and very cut and dry.
That's really smart. The doctor's visits every year and stuff.
Yeah, because that's the one that's always hard to dig up, and the date you did and the address of the all that stuff. It's so much easier just to do on your phone when you're done that day.
Yeah.
Stay up with it.
Well, since we're talking about medicals, we might as well mention the sponsor of this program, our friends over at Harvey Watt. They provide pilot insurance for airmen across the globe. All of that loss of medical insurance that your union might provide or your employer provides is probably through Harvey Watt. You can get more information about all of the coverages they have, not only the loss of medical, but also the life insurance program, which I have there. Very easy to complete the online application. Very few exclusions. It's perfect for any professional pilot. HarveyWatt.com for more information. Thanks, Harvey Watt.
All right, Dylan, we had somebody that wrote in for some flight advice. I'll read it here and we'll discuss. Hey guys, love the show and I'm in need of some advice. I'm a younger dude in my 20s getting my career going at a regional airline. No furlough flute for me yet. I recently met a girl and I'm really into her, but she doesn't work in aviation. So it's taken some work to explain my schedule and lifestyle to her. I have found that it is pretty easy to meet girls in the dating scene as the whole, quote, I'm a pilot thing helps you stand out. But it seems like sustaining a relationship with someone you really like might be tough. Do you guys have any advice for me on how to make a relationship work with the crazy schedule and lifestyle of a regional airline guy? Thanks. From Cockpit Romeo.
I think we should bring in a special guest, someone we both know very well. That is my wife and your sister, Lindsay. Lindsay is a veteran of being married to a regional airline pilot, a corporate pilot, and a charter pilot.
And an unemployed pilot.
Yeah, and an unemployed pilot. I've worn a lot of hats over our years together. So welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you.
So Cockpit Romeo, Max.
Yes. Well, here's what I would say. Here, I'll give you my take and then you guys can say your piece and we'll see what happens. So I think that the biggest thing is to have empathy when you're a pilot. I've been a regional pilot as well, but I've also been a corporate pilot where we're doing crazy stuff that I've talked about on the road while I've had somebody at home raising children while I'm out gallivanting around the world sometimes, or even just on an 3-day airline trip or 4-day or whatever. And I think the thing is you have to have empathy for the other person. And what I mean by that is put yourself into their shoes and look at what you're doing. And you're, around the country, maybe you're out with people they don't know, where you're out having drinks or dinner or whatever. Or really they don't know what you're up to all the time. And so I think you just kind of have to be empathetic to that and maybe call a little more than you want to, FaceTime a few more times than maybe you want to, and just try and put some of those concerns that people will have at ease that are at home while you're out at work. So that's what I've always been, is just kind of take a step back from what you're doing and put yourself in their shoes to look and have some empathy for the strange situation that your job puts people in and try and do things to help put them at ease. And I think that goes a long way.
That's good. What do you think, Lindsay?
Yeah, it's this kind of thing. I think it goes in stages depending on, how old you are, where you're at in life and whatnot. Because I remember, when we met in our earlier mid-20s, it was it was like exciting, like, oh, I'm dating a pilot. That is cool. And like, we can fly places for free, which ended up not being as cool as I thought it was going to be. But that was different. But yeah, and you would be gone and I would miss you and it was hard and blah, blah, blah. And then you have, we got married, had kids, and just all the stuff you talked about in your history. And that was really hard to be at home, especially, when you're bearing the brunt of raising small babies and just when there's a lot going on here and you need the support and you don't have it. So it goes in phases. So I would say, kind of reflecting back onto our mid-20s for the sake of staying relevant to Cockpit Romeo's question. I don't know. I think what Max said carries a lot of weight. Check in a lot, show that you care about what's going on back at home, asking a lot about what they've been up to that day back at home. And then Dylan, took a very good strategy early on of not flaunting in my face when he's, out at drinks and just kicking back on the beach on a Tuesday when I'm at a job I hate all day long every day. And, it's just kind of staying in tune with you're living two very separate lives for half of the time. And you need to keep that in perspective and be very mindful of how that can very easily drive a wedge between you. So keeping that communication open and just staying mindful of that.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to downplay some of the things on the overnight, right?
Yeah. The trip sucks. It's always raining wherever you're at, whatever you got to say. The thing that I learned, especially at the regional airline level, is like you mentioned, Lindsay, you're almost living two lives, right? Because especially on the typical schedule there where it's like 4 days of work, 3 days off. It's basically half of your life you're at work and half of your life you're at home. So a few things I learned about that. For me, especially when I was on the road, I had almost no responsibilities when I was not flying. So it was very easy to just be like, well, now I'm going to watch whatever I want to watch, or I'm going to read whatever I want to read, or eat whatever I want to eat, or do whatever I want to do. And so that kind of carried over when I was at home, because that was what I was used to doing for half of my life, was kind of like whatever I wanted. So that was very challenging. And the second thing was, it took me a while to realize I basically have to live my life in 3-day chunks. So I'm not a great planner and manager of time. And so when I'm at home, I have to kind of be really efficient, and I have to be sensitive to what my significant other wants to do, because we're only going to be together for a couple days. So I remember a couple times I'd go on a trip, Max, and then I'd come home and you'd call and be like, hey, let's go, four-wheeling or do something. And we'd run off, and then I would leave Lindsay at home, and she'd be like, look, I can only see you for a couple days. And then if you're going off and doing whatever you want on your days off, like that makes things even more difficult. So there's a lot to consider there. And I think the last thing is, if you're in aviation, finding a spouse, them being independent is important. There's a lot to consider, but
good luck, Romeo.
There's going to be a learning curve.
To his credit, at least he's early on and he's trying to figure out and have a good plan. So he probably has a good chance of success at cultivating a healthy relationship with this crazy lifestyle that we all lead, because he's actually prospectively looking at it and trying to figure it out.
Yeah. And also I'd say too, is make expectations very clear for the future if you start thinking about a future with somebody too. Because I could remember at times being like, why can't you just not do this and do, work in an office and our life would be so much better? But that would have never worked out, like say you did that, which you wouldn't and shouldn't have, but that wasn't going to be what made us happy. So it's a lifestyle that evolves a lot in terms of how it affects your family and your relationship. And it goes through many ups and downs, but it's just about clear communication and expectations, I think, when it comes, it's all said and done.
And just kind of to wrap it up, make sure that she knows how lucky she is to be dating an airline pilot. Okay. Yeah. Basically repeat that and make her really realize that she's the lucky one here.
Do the opposite of that.
Yeah. We are going to make so much money.
Yeah.
We're going to fly for free everywhere around the world.
Don't believe it.
Baby.
No.
Anything you want.
Anything you want. Whatever you want. Yeah. Anytime. You ever flown standby?
You're Mr. 100 flights in Europe? It's great.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Lindsay. I have a feeling we could do a whole show on this, and maybe we should. So if our listeners have more comments on what they think about flight advice, what they would tell Cockpit Romeo, or they just want to share their experiences of how they have made relationships work in the crazy world of aviation, we'd love to hear from you. It's info@215podcast.com or on the socials at 215podcast. All right. Thanks, Lindsay.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Last thing before we jump into today's interview, some reviews. Max, we actually got a ton of reviews in the last couple of weeks. I guess everyone was sitting around Thanksgiving holiday and was bored. So
yeah, don't worry, everyone. We're not going to read them all.
Yeah, no. One of my favorites here I got was everything you need and more. As a student at a 141 school working my way toward a career in aviation, I couldn't be more grateful for all the information I've received from listening to the show. So many of my questions have been answered as I start thinking about the future, and so much more I would have never thought about. Of course, the nonstop humor makes it that much better. I'm definitely a forever listener, and that's from Ryan. Thanks for the review, Ryan. Also, TMT Dark, Kurt S., Joey Jets, and Flyboy 47367 all wrote reviews. Shoot us an email with your address, and I will mail you some swag. Thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. And if you want a chance to get some goodies from us, just write us a review on your favorite podcast app or platform. Most folks do it on Apple, and we really appreciate the support. Forever listener for our nonstop humor, Max. That's high praise.
Boom.
So, hey, you guys are funny. Say something funny.
Don't let it go to your head.
No pressure. So this is kind of part 2 of the series we started on some of the paperwork stuff that can really get professional pilots in hot water, especially in business aviation. So you were kind enough to kind of set this all up, Max. Can you talk a little bit about your motivation for wanting to have this conversation with John Clark?
Sure. So what we're going to talk about is probably one of the most broken rules in aviation from a business aviation perspective. And that is, they call it the flight department trap, is just the name that's been coined in articles from NBAA and other places like that. But essentially, it's the fact that running your airplane operation from an LLC, oftentimes with the title of the N number in it, or 123 AZ LLC, or some other aviation themed LLC, there's nothing illegal about having a name, but it just kind of encompasses what we're talking about here, and that is running a company that sole purpose is to operate an airplane is illegal if you don't have a lot of structure behind it, right? And so this is one of the things that I'm dealing with the flight operation that I'm running and starting it up, is that, okay, you have to get LOAs, and you have to, if your business that owns the airplane doesn't have some other sort of revenue generating business, right, then you have to do some things to make sure that you're operating within the bounds of the law. And this has come really to the forefront here from the FAA's perspective, and they're really starting to enforce. And most people that aren't in compliance probably have no idea. I mean, I was one of those people in the past at a different flight operation where I just, that's what a lot of people do.
Well, I think what's interesting, and John gets into this, is what you're trying to do from a tax standpoint and what you need to do from an FAA standpoint can be completely different. So you can structure things that from a tax standpoint are great. And yes, this makes a ton of sense, but that creates a lot of extra challenges from an operational standpoint.
And you're trying to have two sides of compliance with two entities that have zero communication and could care less about what the other one needs or requires. And so setting this all up to have it work in concert with the tax law, the IRS law, and with the FAA can be a real challenge depending on your individual organization. So it's one of those things in aviation that as we've tried to do on this podcast, is bring to light stuff that a lot of people probably aren't aware of, and maybe help someone along the way. So here's our attempt at that with John Clark. All right, everybody. On the line with us today is John Clark. He's the Chief Counsel at Jet RVSM and an attorney, going to talk about the flight department company trap and a bunch of other legal issues as they pertain to pilots. Welcome, John.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show. I think you guys are pretty brave, considering lawyers probably rank at the bottom of people pilots want to speak to on any given day, but I do think we can get some good information out to your listeners. I'm licensed in California, so I have to give the standard disclaimer. Anything I say is either educational or just my opinion, not intended to be specific legal advice applicable to anyone's particular situation. So no attorney-client privilege created through any of our discussions today. So with that out of the way, let's get to it.
John, could you give us just a little bit idea of your background and how you got into aviation?
All right. So I sort of had always longed to be in aviation, had gone to law school, but didn't intend on practicing law. I was actually working in Wichita, Kansas for 3M Aerospace, doing major account relationships in aircraft manufacturing deals with Boeing and Spirit and Bombardier, et cetera. But that 2009 crash got me laid off. And so I dusted off my legal license, and I'd helped Christy found Jet RVSM back in 2006. And so those things came together. So for the last, 12 or so years, I've been practicing aviation law and also the chief operating officer for Jet RVSM.
At Jet RVSM, you're working a lot. Can you talk a little bit about what you currently do?
Right. So my role has sort of gone from the back office to the front office, thanks to the FAA and primarily to the National Air Transportation Association. In 2018, they inserted some language in the FAA Reauthorization Act, basically pushing the FAA to start enforcing archaic rules that were, basically technicalities for Part 91 operations. And so that has brought to the forefront a bunch of really pretty annoying and technically complex rules that affect Part 91 operators and professional pilots. So now I'm spending a lot of my time before we apply to the FAA for letters of authorization, making sure that the operator structure is properly in place. So we're sort of bridging from the ownership structure that was put in place at closing. Now we need an operating structure before applying for letters of authorization, if you want to do it correctly.
Well, I guess that brings us into our first topic, commonly known as the flight department company trap. If you guys Google that, you'll come up with articles from NBAA and trade publications and all kinds of stuff. But John, why don't you just start there as kind of what you were alluding to and tell us what it is and why it's illegal and why nobody knows about it.
Yeah, it's the FAA has sent out a notice to pilots, an informational notice to pilots, warning them that this is an issue and that they're going to be going after it. But I think the biggest problem is that everybody is familiar with illegal charter or the Part 134.5. That's a concept that's pretty well understood. So pilots and operators tend to think, well, I'm not holding out, I'm not charging anybody money, it's just me, I own the company, etc. Well, that solves the 134.5 problem, but it doesn't solve what I call the Part 91.5 problem, which is you created a private carriage for hire company to own and operate the aircraft for either personal transportation of the member of that company, that it's usually an LLC, so it's a member or a shareholder, or the aircraft was put in a special LLC with the title Happy Cloud Aviation is the one Christy and I usually like to point out, something like that. If it says aircraft, aviation, transportation, holding, leasing, logistics, things like that, it's going to raise questions as to, was this company formed specifically to take title to the airplane and then to run operating expenses, pilot expenses, fuel expenses through that LLC? And if you've done that, you have created what the FAA would consider a private carriage for hire, because if the purpose of those flights is for the personal transportation of the sort of the owner of the company or for the owner's other businesses, could be construction, oil and gas, manufacturing, whatever it is, that is not basically is illegal.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the objection you get is, what do you mean? I own the airplane. And the answer to that is that I think I'm stealing this from you, John. No. You own a company that owns an airplane, which is the difference, right?
Right. And if you speaking about, if you want to get more narrow than, let's say, just if you Google flight department company trap, you're gonna get a list of all the lawyers in the game, because everybody's written an article on this topic. But if you Google FAA 2017 cooling legal interpretation, there the FAA Chief Counsel's office has made a very plain statement in 2017 as to why this isn't legal and what constitutes a flight department company. So that's probably the best way to really narrow down if your particular setup looks anything like that, which is basically an LLC flying for the personal transportation of the company owner and or for other business interests. Now, in that opinion, they basically say the IRS may have a disregarded entity concept, but the FAA does not. An LLC is a separate legal person in the eyes of the FAA, and they do not care who owns it.
And that's always the challenge, right? Of being in compliance with the FAA, but also having that mesh with your tax strategy, which is equally important to the owners of these airplanes, right?
Right. And I think that's the best way for pilots to approach this, because the IRS and the states are more aggressive than the FAA. And I refer to as taming the three-headed monster. You're trying to satisfy these two taxing entities and a compliance entity that don't speak to each other, don't agree on the rules, but have very technical requirements. And so an audit is one of the most likely ways that an improper structure will come up, either in the state or with the IRS. And by the time the IRS gets around to auditing something, it's years down the road. And frankly, for the IRS, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. That the auditors are becoming trained to see a jet, to understand a lot of the intricacies of the rules, and know that there's probably a big dollar prize there if they can get it. You want to start, when you're approaching an owner, you're starting with the tax strategy. If you know the tax strategy, then you can develop the compliance strategy. It's very hard to do it the other way around.
Okay. So, John, in a sentence, if you could dumb it down as much as possible, what specifically makes it illegal to just be funding an LLC with capital contributions and running your flight operation through there?
Right. So if you make a capital contribution to an LLC, or you pay an invoice from that LLC, or if you in any way reimburse that LLC for the operating expenses, so fuel, pilots, landing fees, anything that's related to operations, that is considered compensation of an aircraft. And it's for hire because the aircraft is not being flown for the business of the entity. So, if you ask, you have this entity that owns the airplane. What I always ask, what business is that in? It's in the business of owning an airplane. Okay, you just flew down to Las Vegas last week. What was the purpose of that flight? Well, the purpose of that flight was for some other personal or business unrelated to the company that owns the aircraft. So the FAA would consider that as hiring. Somebody hired the aircraft, meaning they asked, please take me from here to there. They do not care that it's all owned by the same person, right? The company is a separate legal person from the person who said, I need to get from, here to Las Vegas. And so that's the issue. The plane has been hired and then compensated. And compensation can be anything of value, including a capital contribution into the checking account of that ownership LLC. So that requires you to essentially seek certification under Part 119, and which is sort of the gateway to 135, 121, et cetera.
So has there been any attempt by the FAA to change this and make it easier to comply with? I mean, because clearly you're not holding out to the public and conduct, but it makes sense what you're saying. Has there been any way to attempt to change the law to make this?
Well, I have spoken to, a few years ago, I happened to cross paths with the FAA Chief Counsel himself, and brought up this topic and that's not going to happen in our professional lifetimes. And I have raised it with the last two heads of flight standards and was told sorry. And even worse, the pilot's the one who's going to be left holding the bag, unfortunately. Rarely, the operators take a lot of legal effort, but the pilots are easy to go after. So it's always a kind of an apologize, shake the head, but there is simply no appetite to change these rules. But let me explain why, because, as you mentioned, well, we're not holding out, we're not doing that. It's all technicalities. True. But let me tell you what I think is, well, what I know is really going on, which is there is a public policy against isolating liability for an aircraft unless you are under the scrutiny of the FAA. So if you want to isolate your liability away from you for operating an aircraft, you must go under some higher level certification where the FAA can scrutinize your operations. They're willing to let you fly under the less restrictive Part 91 rules if you agree to be liable for your own operations. So the real problem is that the owners were attempting from day one to isolate the liability for the operation of the aircraft. That's the real problem. The second problem is that very often, if the FAA finds that the person who's using the aircraft, so you've got some passengers on board, they have a purpose for being on the plane, you fly them there. If the FAA were during a ramp check determined that those people in the back did not fully grasp that they are liable to the FAA and the public for airworthiness and the safety of all phases of flight operation, that's the other problem. So if you don't grasp those liabilities and you've tried to isolate them in some other entity, you don't get the less restrictive Part 91 rules. That's what's really going on.
Okay, that actually makes some sort of sense to why this is a thing, right? Because the whole point of people normally setting up these entities to own the airplane is to try and insulate themselves from liability.
Doesn't work anyway.
Yeah, right.
Whatever the purpose, if you're flying a personal flight, unless they've really met a lot of these rules, it's very tight. If you're flying a vacation flight for somebody, that person's liable. If you're flying on a business trip for some company, it doesn't matter what structure you put in place. They're liable. The pilot's liable.
It's the analogy of putting the tissue in front of the freight train to try and that's about how much insulation it gives you, right?
Right. It's a speed bump. It would be an eyebrow raised by the plaintiff's attorney that's going to cut through that thing. It does there's reasons why you put those structures in place. So I'm not arguing that you shouldn't create those companies, but that brings us around to just the problem is they created an ownership structure which was legal, but they didn't create an operating structure that was legal, and you need to do both.
That's great. John, I want to focus in on that the pilots are often left holding the bag when it comes to enforcement. So let's just go through a scenario and you can kind of walk us through what are the red flags? What should we as professional pilots do? If I show up to do a trip on an airplane, maybe it's the first time I've flown the airplane, I see that the airplane is registered under, 123 AB LLC, and there's a lease to Acme Widget Corporation who owns the LLC, and I've got LOAs that I should look at, obviously the names on the LOAs, there's all sorts of different things. So can you help walk us through what professional pilots, the red flags we can look for when we're going to work for a new operator?
Okay, sure. Now, very often, I think you would show up and you'd have the registration on the aircraft and you'd have the LOAs, if there are any, are in the name of the registered owner. And it has some, if it says Cloud Sky Aviation, Aircraft Transport, any of those, or if it's a tail number LLC or a serial number, anything like that, you've already got, a problem. It would be better if prior
half our listeners are turning the volume up right now on the
right now and we'll get to what to do if you're getting ramp checked and you're in that situation. So there's a few things you might do to make things easier on yourself, but ideally what you would want to find a dry lease, and if you find 6 dry leases or 10 dry leases on there, then you should be thinking, okay, do we really need to have all these on board? Because the FAA is trained to look for multiple dry leases. So, and this happens a lot during ramp checks. They ramp check, they ask who the operator is, do you have a dry lease? And then they see the pilot fumbling through a stack of dry leases, looking for the right one. That's a terrible red flag. So the first step is, if you're flying for a particular operator, locate that dry lease. If there's other ones there, set them aside. And then I usually would say, who's paying my fee today? So if whatever is the lessee's name on that lease, that's who should be paying you. And there's a lot of different variations of this, which is the problem. But if you're being paid by an agency, if you're being paid by a subsidiary, some other subsidiary of a corporate group, or you're on a personal flight, but they're running it through you, they're paying the fuel on a personal credit card, but running your fee through a company, those are all red flags. Essentially, the name on any dry lease, the name on any letters of authorization, the name on the fuel card, the name on your paycheck should all match. That would be the ideal situation.
And that's a pretty easy one to check. I'm just thinking about scenarios that I've been in. It's very easy to see, the name, and then check the LOAs just for the operator name. That, to me, I bet those are in conflict pretty often.
The most recent NTSB ruling, which was against Captain Reed Phillips and suspended him for 240 days, the FAA tried to go after him. He leveled off an RVSM airspace, and when we presented during a ramp check the LOAs, it was in a different name than the lessee that he was flying for. The FAA just didn't. They got him on a bunch of other stuff, but they didn't manage to get this. But it does show that the FAA does care. If you come into their sites for whatever reason, and they look at the air traffic records and they see that you were in RVSM airspace with the wrong name on an LOA, they will hold that against you.
So say you do get busted. What are you looking at? Like suspension, revocation? Like what happens to the pilots?
I've only seen suspensions. I haven't seen any revocations. There would have to be they'd have to be real mad at you for that. Even Reed Phillips, basically the FAA had warned him at least 2, maybe 3 times to stop flying for his aircraft management company that he was working for. At least I'm kind of simplifying, but they had handed him cease and desist letters, and he listened to the company lawyer telling him that everything was fine. So he ignored the FAA. So that's just as a side note here. If the FAA tells you something's wrong and you shouldn't be flying, stop flying, because the next thing you could get is a suspension. So take warnings very seriously. That would be the easiest way to stay out of trouble. I would say I've definitely seen a few suspensions over the last 10 years. Most commonly, they will basically pull you into the office, cancel all the LOAs, read you the riot act, tell you got to clean up your act. That kind of make your life miserable for a while.
All right.
So John, if we are professional pilots showing up, we're starting to see some questions about the paperwork. Maybe there's a lot of leases like you had mentioned. What should we as professional pilots do to protect ourselves?
All right. Well, the first thing to understand is that the FAA operates on a facts and circumstances basis. So they're more concerned about what's actually happening than what's on the paperwork. So I actually think it's better to be honest about the circumstances and understanding that maybe the paperwork isn't right and that might be a problem. But if you're truthful, even despite the paperwork not being correct, that's I think is going to avoid a suspension. That's going to allow the FAA to try to guide the operator through compliance and leave you without a problem. So the first thing I always would say for a pilot to do is you're now, as of the last NTSB ruling, where they said the contract ATP is responsible to understand the nature of the operations that are being flown. So you should know, who is authorizing this flight. Is that person on board? And then before you take off, you should be saying to the passengers, if anybody approaches us on the ramp during this trip, so-and-so is operating the flight. Now, if it says, if the registration is in that Acme Aviation LLC, probably through conversation, you kind of know that you're really flying for this particular person who's in the back of the airplane. And so you might be able to just sort of establish on a facts and circumstances basis, is this a personal trip for that person, or is this a business trip for a company? And so without getting into the whole operational technicalities, as a pilot, the best thing you could know is, are we flying for a business, or are we flying for a person's recreation, vacation, entertainment flight? If you can just understand that. And then if you can agree with the passengers, if the FAA approaches us at any stop, the purpose of this flight is such and such, being operated by so-and-so. And don't even bring up the fact that the registration or the LOAs are in the wrong name. I mean, this is in the worst case where you can't fix things in advance. You can't say no, and you're forced to be PIC. You can't beg off on flying PIC. So then if you're at a ramp check and you're approached, you just want to make sure that whatever you previously agreed is who's operating the flight. And what can you do as a pilot other than be truthful? Because in some cases, like in this last case that the NTSB ruled on, the FAA looked in the cabin and looked at the water bottles and noticed that they had logos on them for an aircraft management company, and considered that a bad sign. So they'll start looking around for little things suggesting, who's operating this flight. So best if you said, I'm flying for this construction company and we're on a business trip, or this aircraft is normally operated for the construction company, but we're on a personal flight for the CEO and his family, something like that.
It's time to get rid of all those monogram napkins, Max.
Yeah,
too risky.
Definitely. Right. If it looks like this thing was arranged, you don't want to see logos for the aircraft management company or the FBO is fine. You pick up all the water bottles from the last FBO you were at.
Well, actually, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is silly then, but for a lot of flight departments I know in our airport, you'll see the pilots with logoed shirts, something like that. So maybe that might also be something to consider, huh?
That's the way to get your Part 135 competitors to whistleblow if they see that. I mean, those are the kinds of things that get phone calls to the FAA to come check it out. If they see two uniformed pilots with logo shirts dropping passengers off at the FBO and they don't know whose certificate that aircraft is on, they might this happens on a regular basis. That the number one way that people get caught by the FAA is from a charter operator on the airport complaining about an aircraft they've seen a couple of times that looks suspicious. But one of the things I do want to say is some things not to do. The worst thing you can say is, I don't know, I'm just the driver. Okay, that's one of the most common responses that I get from professional pilots. That is not the thing to say to the FAA. I have no idea they just pay me and I fly. Those are not the correct answers.
If it were only that simple. That's called being an airline pilot. That's what that's called.
Right. The best thing to do is say, as far as I know, we're on a business trip for so-and-so, and these are the passengers, hosted by the company. So some answer like that is a solid answer. And then if the paperwork doesn't look right, say, woo, that, look surprised.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, and right. And talk about how if there's any issue, anything you could do to keep moving along and not, basically say, hey, could we need to get to our next destination. Can I call you when I get back to my home office or the hangar? hand them your business card, anything that says you're not trying that. Anything, as long as it doesn't look like I don't care and you're trying to avoid them or trying to cover up something. Those would be the things you don't want to do.
All right. So let's say that you have, 123 ABC LLC and it's operated just like you described you shouldn't. And that's all that the LLC does is own the airplane and pay for the operating expenses, et cetera. So now, you listen to this podcast, it brings to light that you're doing something illegal. How do you bring that situation into compliance?
Okay. And so there's a few levels here, but I might mention when in the past at the NBA events, when we could all meet in person, every time the FAA regulators or let's say a lawyer would stand up and start talking about this, you would see 3 or 4 chief pilots run out of the room because you could see the ripple run through there. So this always catches people off guard. So the best timing is just to throw this in here is if you're working with a flight department, you're acquiring a new aircraft. If they're working with an aviation CPA on their tax strategy, and it's an aviation specific CPA who works with other regular CPAs, but just on the aviation part, they will guide the operator through this process, and you're going to get 60-80% compliant right there. So that's always the best bet. If you're in a cleanup situation and you can get with either the in-house counsel, their local business attorney, you can always call Jet RVSM if you're working on LOAs. I talk to a lot of owners, CEOs, et cetera, just to sort of gently bring them up to speed on these things if I can. But if you're right there in the field, so you're saying that you're there, it's wrong, and you're supposed to get on the plane and start flying.
Yeah, you're listening to this. You're a pilot. It's the company you've worked for 5 years, and we've just brought to light that your operation is not set up properly. Now,
so how do we come to Jesus? Yeah, maybe not for the flight tomorrow, but just to get the ball rolling. What's the process?
Okay. Well, so let's just say if you did just show up on the ramp, and if there's any way you cannot be pilot in command, that's the day to say, I don't mind being first officer. I'll fly SIC. Okay, because it's the PIC that's good. If there's a ramp check, that's all eyes are going to be on the PIC. But let's say you're working for somebody who's got this problem. If they're, I would think if there was anybody inside the company who was taking care of the money part of it. Usually I find that a chief financial officer does not like to risk tax problems or compliance penalties and fines, et cetera. So if the company's big enough to have somebody like that, then you can try to start with somebody inside the company, either the in-house counsel or the chief financial officer controller. If it's a smaller operation and you're just dealing with the principal, if you find some of these articles online, what I find is you say there's been some changes at the FAA recently, and there's an evolution of enforcement and scrutiny, and things which were accepted in the past don't look like they're going to be accepted in the future. And so, if there's a way we could sit down and kind of look at this, that would be great, as a starting point. What I'm finding is I'm having a lot of pilots come to me who've never had a written agreement with their client. Or let's say you're an employee pilot, but you're an employee for a subsidiary, but you're flying for the parent company. There needs to be some paperwork there. So you as a part of a compliance discussion, when I draft a pilot service agreement or an aircraft management agreement, if a chief pilot, let's say, is handling everything, it's going to contain a bunch of language in there that's almost like a teaching instrument, so that so a lot of pilots now are taking a solid agreement, sitting down to negotiate that, and out of that comes these compliance issues get raised in that discussion. It's not necessarily an easy discussion. Somebody can certainly call me up at Jet RVSM and I can help them in a specific situation.
Yeah, I mean, I just imagine for many of us that have been working for a company that's maybe had an aircraft for a while, and then this is being brought to light, you're gonna run into the resistance of, well, that's the way we've always done it, or our other operation, we've been doing it like this for a while. So it just seems like that initial convincing of, hey, things are changing or have changed, or new information's available. That'll be the hardest part.
Right. 2016, 2017, the FAA started revising its internal guidance to inspectors. So, and then you see these legal interpretations, and there was sort of a re-emphasis. Then, not until late in 2018, I think it was, that the National Air Transportation Association, which is lobbying on behalf of primarily the charter industry, that saying, hey, there's a lot of illegal charter going along. We'd like to put the kibosh on all this illegal charter. And so they created a website, they created a task force, they started lobbying the FAA. And so they are the ones currently pushing the FAA to investigate years of basically whistleblower phone calls and complaints about illegal charter. But I have spoken with the high-level members of NATA, attended meetings, and I've kind of tried to say, where do you draw the line between the illegal charter you're worried about and then these sort of technicalities? And there really isn't a bright line there, because their goal is that they feel that most businesses should actually be putting their aircraft on a charter and then chartering it for their personal and business use. So they see, for a lot of these small operations, they think it's better off if it's all run under Part 135. So, that's not an argument that anybody's going to win. But so they basically are treating what I call Part 91.5 the same as Part 134.5. And so you're seeing them, for example, go into an FAA region, get the FSDO inspectors, sort of on board with this, and then they call a bunch of people in and start, telling them what they're doing isn't right. So you'll see this slowly, region by region. So, if you wait, maybe you'll get a call from the FAA to come in and spend a few hours there discussing these problems.
Yeah, it sounds like basically at the end of the day, the Part 91 operators would get caught in the crossfire here with the more traditional 134.5 type stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not what the FAA or the National Air Transportation Association is going after, but it is getting swept up in the net. Now, what I tell people is, I don't think you need to lose sleep over this, because if you have a compliance philosophy, so if you're in a ramp check or what this new thing that's coming, I think called a Part 91 department inspection, where they're actually going to dig into the operational control stuff. So it's I don't know what you'd call it, a super ramp check.
Yeah, base inspection. Isn't that what they call it a lot of times?
Yeah,
too?
Base inspection. So, and we had the first one. We had one with a customer in January, and they don't care if you don't have a hangar or base of operation. They'll just say, "Tell me what airport you're going to be at, and I'll meet you there." And so I have said, people tell me, "Oh, we don't have a base, or we don't have a hangar, or this or that." The FAA doesn't care. That what they'll do is call you up, and it's like a scheduled ramp check, but they're going to go into the operational ownership and operational structure. But I think, as I said, the first thing is, don't lose sleep over it. Think of it as a project for the next year. Maybe 2021 is the year where you have conversations with the owner saying, I'm getting a little concerned because I'm hearing about some increasing scrutiny and enforcement, and that the pilot's certificate can be at risk, or you can find all of your letters of authorization just canceled. And I'll give you a couple of examples that happened in the last year or so. Pilot changed his cell phone number. The chief pilot changed his cell phone number, called up the FSDO to change that for the letters of authorization, all canceled, and for multiple operators. And so they were, without any warning, they weren't able to enter any special airspace, no international travel. So it's better to kind of get that going versus you call up to make a small change and find yourself with the canceled LOAs. Or the other thing is they're looking for some people to do these base inspections on. And if you happen to call up that day, you could get, they could say, oh, there's somebody we can work on. So that's what I'm noticing.
And just to kind of the most basic sense, John, because bringing your specific situation into compliance could be as easy as one dry lease agreement and kind of changing your accounting as far as, going as far as having multiple leases with different entities within the organization, blah, blah. But basically just to give people an idea of what you may have to do to then be in compliance, can you just kind of give a quick and dirty version?
Let's see. Yes, the quick and dirty version of something the American Bar Association called mind-bendingly complex.
Translated into pilot speak, please.
Yeah, right. Okay, so once again, first, let's say if somebody came to me and said, run me through your operational compliance check. And I've been doing this because this is a little gentler way for an operator to see what's going on. So if I'm doing an operational compliance check, we're going to spend, it's almost always about 90 minutes on the phone with the principal, with the the person who's handling the money, maybe a lawyer or an outside CPA. And we're going to go through an exhaustive list, starting from how do you like to operate this plane? Who's using the plane? What kind of passengers are you having on here? Business, personal, etc. And out of that process, we can say, okay, well, here are your, options for compliance. You have, 2 or 3 levels, and some of them are 70% compliant, some are 80% compliant. If you were 50 or 60% compliant, you're already better than everybody else on the ramp, because the non-compliance is, I think, my best guess is 80%. So 8 out of 10 operators, if they were to come in and talk to me, would find out that they're not technically compliant. Now, there's different shades of things, but I do get it where somebody brings in their plane and they're issuing invoices to 4 different companies that they own for use of the aircraft and charging for passengers. Now, not holding out, just doing it within their own company, but that kind of money changing hands, that's what gets the FAA's attention. If it turns out that no money's changing hands and it's just the wrong name on some paperwork, that's better. But we would go through that. And what generally comes out of this is either you have co-owners of a plane and they should have some sort of co-ownership agreement that the FAA will recognize as compliant. Another way to do this is to have a dry lease, and money can change hands under a dry lease for the use of the aircraft. I also do something called a gratuitous bailment. If there's a need for one party to exercise operational control, but they're not going to pay for it, there's no money changing hands. They just, it's Acme Aviation LLC, and the actual operator is Acme LLC. So we just need to get the right to exercise operational control transfer. So that could be as easy as, a short agreement to accomplish that. Then there's also under the FARs is something called joint ownership agreement. So if you have joint owners, you can actually have one operator who's legally liable for the operations of all of them, sort of a wet leasing exemption. So that's why it's hard to simplify, because there's a kind of a suite of compliance tools out there. But the simplest one that people hear of is a dry lease of the aircraft from the owner to the operator.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Well, that's the flight department company trap. If you find yourself in the situation, you got to get to work. And if you're in full compliance, kudos to you.
I like that. I like your idea, John, of a project for 2021.
Yeah, that's a good way. Not you don't want to walk up to the boss and put the brakes on the whole operation so we get this remedied, I think is the idea. So let's move on just to some other professional pilot legal issues, John, that you're well versed in. You alluded to some contracts and pilot services agreements that you draw. When are those appropriate, and in what scenario?
Okay, so there's I basically see three types of agreements, and only one of them is absolutely essential. So if so many pilots, now are we talking about contract pilots? Are we talking about employee pilots?
All of the above. Whatever is appropriate in whatever scenario is what we're interested in.
If you are an employee of the operator, you don't need any paperwork because you're an agent, you're under the command and control of the operator, you're perfectly fine. However, if you're an employee pilot, but the name on your paycheck is a company that's different than the one that it's paying for the fuel or paying for your hotel, or somehow you get the sense that your paycheck comes under Acme Payroll LLC or Acme Logistics Services LLC, but the CEO is the CEO of Acme Manufacturing, that is an issue where you'd want to get with the HR department and simply say, it needs to be clear to the FAA that I am an agent of the operator of the aircraft. I need to be able to quickly show the FAA, if I'm approached, that I'm under the command and control of the operator and not this subsidiary. And the first piece of evidence the FAA looks at is who paid you, because the presumption is whoever paid you has control of you as a pilot. So that brings up this term pilot agency, which is the most critical thing whenever you are being paid by somebody other than the actual true operator of the flight. Now let's go to the contractor. If you have an LLC, a lot of contract pilots have their own LLC, and so they have some company writes their LLC a check. Now it could be an intermediate, it could be an agency that facilitates contract pilots. It could be anything. I see all kinds of things, but it's very often that there's some check going to the pilot's own LLC, but there's no direct relationship in writing between the individual pilot and the true operator of that flight. So again, the way that's solved is with something called pilot agency. And if you have that in writing and it looks pretty and simple, and then you hand that to an FAA inspector, that's going to be the end of that problem. You have just now shown that you're under the command and control of the operator, and that's essential for Part 91 compliance. So if, let's say they're doing a lot of other stuff in the back that you don't understand or isn't quite compliant, but you've got your pilot agency with the right party, that's going to go a long ways to protecting, your backside.
And is this pilot agency, so let's just say, scenario here, Max is the chief pilot on an airplane. He calls me, can you come do a one-off trip for us? Can you explain that a little bit more, how contract pilots can really use that?
Well, so let's say you were coming to me. I would ask you, do you have a pilot LLC that you use?
Mm-hmm. I do, yeah.
You do? Okay, so you're going to ask to be paid in the name of that LLC. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you do it as a handshake? There's no legal requirement for it to be in writing. So do you do a handshake agreement because you've known each other and you just submit an invoice after the trip, or do you have a little form agreement that you use with your LLC?
It's always just been a handshake agreement. That seems like what happens a lot.
Right. So as a lawyer, of course, I'd say I don't recommend that because it's great until something goes wrong. And now you don't have the proper indemnities and promises to be on the insurance. You may think you're on the insurance, but did you get an endorsement issued to you, et cetera? So a lot of sins can be solved by just having a nice pilot service agreement, which covers all the legal, the business and legal aspects of flying, not compliance, because the FAA doesn't care about this pilot service agreement so much. So now you have that in place. If the FAA asks who paid you for the flight, remember the FAA doesn't recognize the LLC as you. They consider your LLC as your employer, and you have been contracted by your employer to the operator. So that leaves you flying for the CEO who's telling you where to go at the same time that you're getting paid by your own company. So that's where you'd have a form. I generally create a form for that pilot that they can use with all of their operators, but there's some intricacies to it. So it's hard to just have some one size fits all, but generally you can create for a pilot a form they can just PDF that they can just fill out with each operator that basically says I'm a limited for the purposes of your flights, I'm a limited scope agent of yours under your command and control. And if you have a handshake agreement, that's fine, because just with the FAA, you can show them this agreement, and it would establish that you are working for the correct party, even though you're not getting paid by that party. So that's what the pilot agency really accomplishes, is it shows that you are properly under command and control, even though you're not being paid directly in your name from that operator.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I would say, Max, most of the contract trips that happen, it's all handshake, and I don't think there's a lot of signed.
Yeah. It's just a matter of defining the relationship, right? And so rather than implying it all the time, which is always a good idea.
Right. I mean, if somebody comes to me, I set them up with which is a template for them. You go through a lot of all the different aspects of what they do, how they're involved, how much are they managing any operations? Are they handling supplemental lift? Are they arranging ground transportation? What are all their duties? What's the limitation? I spend time with pilots on saying, wouldn't you like to have the operator understand that if you haven't had 10 hours sleep, that next trip, it might not be going now on the one-off, that may not make a difference. But I'd say with your regular clients, if you have one agreement signed once, then you can just accept the trips, as is. But you try to have sort of a one-time master agreement. But these things are so specific, and there's a lot of personalities involved. And so when I'm working with somebody, we're trying to really, does this operator, maybe they don't want to. They're more comfortable if they DocuSign something that's short, then they'll be okay. But if they have to print out and look at a long agreement, they won't do it. So we try to work through the psychology of the situation and then draft just what's needed, to get by in that particular case. But once again, the worst case, if you just have the pilot agency, your butt is covered, and the rest of it's just business terms.
Right. Strategery. I like it. Well, John, we're going to have you take your lawyer hat off now and shift gears a little bit and talk about your, software developer hat. I'm not sure if that's the right hat you're wearing, but you guys are working on something pretty interesting called the Pre-Flight app. And this has to do with contract pilot stuff we were just talking about. So can you just explain to our listeners a little bit about this project you guys are undertaking?
Right. So when we first saw the tide changing on this compliance stuff, and we started to see pilots getting left holding the bag, as we talked about, we thought, what could we do so that all of this complexity could be basically digitized under the hood, so that you could focus on, hey, be here on this day, fly from here to here for this, here's you make your own travel arrangements, or we'll make them for you, whatever. Just those things that you care about, the logistics of getting a flight done. And if in the process of that, just by using it, by, let's say, running that transaction through a platform, if there ever was an incident, you could print out all of the documents, the compliance, it would show the right signatures on the right pieces of paper, but you wouldn't have to be burdened with that all of the time. And if you signed up an operator for it, in order for them to participate in the app, there would be master terms and conditions that would apply, that would be focused on that. So that was one motivating factor for setting up what I would call pre-flight ops. The next issue would be, we heard from many pilots repeatedly that, I was asked to fly and I showed up at the FBO and I didn't know the PIN code to get in the gate, or I didn't know who I was flying with, or I had no idea what the paperwork on the plane was like. So the second part of this platform is that if you're an operator on the platform, we've already looked at that paperwork. And in the app, if you were assigned to a flight, you'd be able to look at a checklist and see, yep, LOAs are in order, not in the name of a flight department company. So the other question is you'd be able to trust that the operators you're flying for have passed a minimal level that your certificate isn't going to be at risk by taking this job. So that was sort of the second part of it. When we first started this, there was a massive pilot shortage, and very few people were interested in this, and people were more interested in pilot notification. And there was an app out there called Pure Flight Magic. Was created by Herb Dyer down in Louisiana. This was an app that was designed to basically send out notifications or request trip offers to pilots, because in this shortage, people were, maybe getting tired of having to go through their contacts. And that piece of the puzzle, we ended up acquiring that from Herb and doing a lot of surveys with contract pilots, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. And so we decided, well, we'll lead with that. So we have Pre-Flight Connect, which is a trip sort of offer and notification platform that's much simpler. It doesn't have all of the compliance stuff built into it, but if we get that going, then we'll bolt the two together down the road.
Okay. Well, so it sounds like the better name for this app should just be CYA.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly the pandemic and the pilot shortage going to a pilot surplus, we've sort of put it on the back burner, but we are ready to work with small groups of operators and pilots so let's say if you've got an operator that doesn't use full-time pilots, they have maybe 5 go-to pilots that they like to use, and then somebody, maybe the chief pilot, knows of what has the master flight schedule and sends out trip notifications. And in this, it's a pretty simple app that would allow you to set up the trip. It would go out to, you could say, I want this to go to a small group of pilots that I've approved. I want this to go to just my approved pilots. Then you could just send it to those pilots whose certificates you've logged as approved pilots, who are also on the system. It allows for 3 tiers or 3 levels or 3 groups. You can divvy it up any way you want, but basically you can put pilots that into 3 categories, and you could notify the first group, and if no one accepts, you could then notify the second group. And if that doesn't work, maybe the third group, or maybe you have 3 different aircraft in the fleet and you want to group the pilots by the aircraft. But so there's a few ways to just work with the pilots. Eventually, if you can't find somebody you would then be able to broadcast that out to the pre-flight network of pilots. But these would be, in order to be in the pre-flight network, you have to be current in the type ratings you're listing. You have to have your medical has to be current. Everything has to be, you have to be legal to fly. So, because we heard people saying, oh yeah, can you send me to training? Or I just need to do a couple takeoff and landings and then I'm good to go. And so that's not always what the chief pilot wants to hear when he's looking for somebody to fill a role.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice to be the great filter right now, especially with there's so many pilots looking for work and everything else. I imagine it can be pretty overwhelming for a chief pilot to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Right. So if I were working, generally what I'm doing right now is if you want to use Pre-Flight Connect, we're manually handling the compliance stuff. So we'd want to do an operational compliance check, make sure that the if it's a couple of operators and 6 pilots, make sure all their paperwork is in place. So we can get all the paperwork in place, and I generally do the legal work through my legal practice, and then we can handle the pilot notification stuff through pre-flight.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty valuable app. Now, what does it cost for the pilots or the operators, or how does that work?
If you go to the App Store right now, it's $50 to download Pre-Flight Connect. However, if you email us at connect@preflight, and it's preflite.com, connect@preflight.com. And if you can meet the criteria, we'll go through some questions, et cetera. If you have a small group, then I'll send out redemption codes so that you can download the app and use it for no charge. And if you're participating with us actively, we wouldn't charge you for, the next 2 years. What we want to do is we want to meet the need first, get traction with pilots and make sure it's working. So that's why we want to work with some beta testers who aren't going to get charged anything. But then, that maybe that app will be $50 a year, something like that. But then if they go on to the operations one, that's quite a bit more involved. So we haven't gotten to the pricing on that yet. But my goal would be for it to be $500 or less per year to have what is essentially a lot of horsepower under the hood.
Right. We'll have all of those email addresses in the show notes for anyone who's interested, or it can be found on our website as well. Dylan, anything else for John?
I watched the webinar that you participated in from the NorCal BAA recently. We'll have a link to that as well. The thing that I walked away from this conversation is everybody's situation is a little bit different, right? And it seems like you can't just read one article and then kind of figure out what you got to do. So I'm walking away from it going, I'm probably going to need to bring in a professional like yourself or somebody else to consult with our operation and make sure that our compliance is assured, I guess, in the future.
Right. And what we're trying to do is making the operational compliance check. I need to hear a little bit about what's going on, but it's a $1,000 or less fixed price to find out what's going on without, before you walk into the attorney's office and put down the $10,000 retainer. Because the main thing with operators is they know what happens when you walk into the attorney's office. You have this open-ended expense and you don't know where it's going to go. So what I like to be able to do is say, hey, here's what you're facing. And then if you want to use a firm, we have many excellent colleagues in every state that we can refer people to. We know aviation CPAs. We can bring those people in if they make sense. But the main thing is that the operator can understand in finite terms what they're dealing with for a fixed price and a few hours of their time.
That sounds like money well spent.
If you want to stay up to date, they can send an email to either John at Jet RVSM.com if you're interested in sort of the letters of authorization type stuff, or connect@preflight.com. We don't spam. We send out, if we see something happening in the industry worthy of writing an article, we'll send that out. So we sort of maybe 4 or 5 times a year, you might get a briefing on something that's important, whether it's letters of authorization, whether it's Part 91 compliance, or if it's a professional pilot type issue. So if somebody sends us an email, we'll put you on our email list. So that's some way just sort of to get some updates here and there on what we're doing. Maybe keep it remind you sometime in 2021 that you were meaning to fix something.
Well, great stuff, John. We certainly appreciate your time today. We'll have all your contact info in the show notes on our website. And I suspect when we have our next compliance question, you'll be our first call. So thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Sure. Happy to help.
All right.
Sure. Thanks.
Thanks, John. We certainly appreciate it. You are a wealth of knowledge on this stuff, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for so much to John Clark for coming on. We'll have all of his contact info in the show notes,
as well as the link to the cooling letter that he referred to, right? I sent you that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. We've got that as well. So lots of good information. And I know a lot of our listeners will probably have to take a deep look into what they're doing and wonder if this is worth tackling in 2021. So I screwed up a little bit. I didn't know this, but after we talked to John Clark on the last episode, we talked to Christy about the LOAs. And then I was like, she probably doesn't have any good stories. And so we ended up telling our own story. Turns out, I guess she's got incredible stories about doing all the RVSM certification all over the world. So we're going to have to get her back on the line soon and hear some of these crazy stories. So in the meantime, though, you had talked about
You had teased a story about somewhere in Greece doing a motorcycle ride or something.
I guess I'm on the hot seat now. So anybody, again, if you have good stories, please let us know, because we don't want to be the ones telling the stories all the time. But yeah, so we flew to this island called Karpathos, Greece, and it was kind of a more of an off the beaten path, not like Mykonos or Santorini that everyone goes to. And so we flew into Karpathos, and we're going to stay there for a week or whatever. So we had set up a little rental car and the whole deal. So we're driving from the airport that's kind of out by itself into town to our hotel. And right by our hotel, we turn the corner and there's Gattuli's motorcycles for rent. And they have like dual sport motorcycles. And the island is a lot of rural areas, just from our research we've done. And so, as we drive by, my head turns and I look over at the guy I was flying with, and I said, dude, let's drop our bags off and turn this car in. And because there was like a Hertz rental car or whatever, it was right down the street. So we dropped off our bags at the hotel, turned in the rental car, and rented 2 motorcycles for the week as our company transportation. And
what kind of motorcycles are you taking?
So one was like air cooled, like Suzuki DR, like there was a 250 and a 350. And the guy I was flying with, he was bigger than me. So I'm like, all right, you take the 350, I'll take the 250. And we ripped around that entire island, dirt roads everywhere, down to these like beaches that were riding through like olive orchards, then down, it pops out in a beach, and there's like goats crossing, and just everywhere we rode these bikes. And just like you see in pictures of the little, the hillside villages that are all white,
right,
stucco, and you're ripping through those. And, we had lunch at some lady's at her dining room that she like made us, just because we were from not there. And it was incredible. And so I had ridden dirt bikes a lot. So I had a ton of experience riding in the dirt, and the other pilot, he had ridden a lot on the street, but not a lot on the dirt. So we had so he's kind of teaching me when you go around corners and how you kind of counter steer and about, and I'm trying to explain to him when we go off road and how to ride. And it was funny. So he laid his over when we were first going off road, and like tore off one of the turn signals on the back and some stuff. And then I was trying to keep up with him because it's really hilly, and he's on a 350. So I'm winding mine out.
Yeah.
And a really high RPM. And then it starts getting hard to start. It was electric start. So it wouldn't start an electric start, and it would only start when I'd kick it, which means I'm like, we're kind of blowing the top end out of this. And so the compression is not as good. So it needs a little bit more of a robust spin to get it going. And so I was like, yeah, I should probably take it a little easier, but of course I didn't. And so we're ripping around, and so then it won't start when I kick it. And we're like a day or two from being at the end of the trip, and I'm like, oh geez. So then I would have to park up on a hill, and I'd have to give it a good shove down the hill, hop on and pop the clutch in second or third gear, and it would turn over a few times, and then it would run. It was just, you could tell it wasn't as powerful. So we rode the crap out of these bikes, right? I had like beer strapped to the back at one time. We had our backpacks on with our snorkel gear, and we would ride around everywhere. And it was a total free for all. And our passengers saw us. We pulled into the hotel because we were staying at the same hotel. And we roll in on motorcycles, and they just give us a slow head turn. Like, look at these idiots again. They're like, what did you? And we're just like, what? What would you do? so anyway, so we end up turning in these motorcycles at the end of this great week. I'll send you a couple of pictures you can post from this.
Tell them about the story of when you were like on a ride and you saw the airplane like off. You were like riding near the airport and you saw the airplane.
Yeah. So this place, it was not set up for business jets at all. So we dropped the passengers off kind of on the airline apron, and then we had to reposition the airplane. We basically parallel parked it at the approach end of the runway, like kind of there's a little bump out where there's like a run-up area, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
And so we basically parallel parked it. Like we get there and they're like trying to tell us to park here. And I'm like, dude. And so it was one of the times with the engines running, Craig went down the stairs and got out of the airplane and closed up the air stairs from the outside on the Gulfstream. And he marshaled me because I didn't trust this idiot that was doing it because we had to put the mains like really close to the edge. And so I had him out there. I'm in there by myself. It's just one of those things in business aviation. Like we say, you just kind of figure it out. Was a figure it out day. And he's out there marshaling me and whole thing. So we parked the airplane there and we go up and we're on a ride up on this hill where these ruins that we wanted to check out. You kind of overlooking the airport. And we get up there and we're looking and we see the C-130 holding short of the runway. And we see our plane in the back, just the wings shaking and the tail. And we're like, I'm like, oh, we set the gust lock, right? And so then you see the guy take the runway, add a bunch of power, and it's like the plane's shaking everywhere. We're like, geez, dude. So we did a good rock around.
They built those G3s pretty solidly.
Like luckily. So at the end of the trip, we turn in our motorcycles, right? And at the place, and we run in, I shut it down, and they do their inspection and give me back my deposit and everything. They go to Craig's like, oh, you break the turn signal, that's no good. And like something else. And they charge them like, a bunch of money, $80 for the turn signal. It's like $20 on eBay, and all this stuff. And we walk away and we're just like,
and you just completely destroyed the top end of the bike.
I hope he doesn't start that thing up until we're out of here.
Oh man. Well,
that was it.
There you go. I remember you like calling me from Greece while you were doing that. I think we did a fantasy football draft too, like while you were there.
Yeah, I did. It was like 2 a.m. and I'm there. Yeah,
good times.
Good trip. Yeah, that was a blast.
If you've got a good story like that, maybe a good. Every pilot's got a good overnight story, and we want to hear them. So hit us up, let us know. info@215podcast.com. That is going to do it for episode number 45. Thanks to John Clark at Jet RVSM. Thanks to our friends at Harvey Watt. And thanks to Lindsay for coming on and giving us her perspective.
Yeah, little sis. Thank you.
Good luck, Cockpit Romeo out there. Relationships are tough.
I was just going to say, that's your catchphrase. Relationships are tough.
That's right. Well, you can follow us on social media at 215 Podcast. We've got more aviation license plates coming out through our Instagram feed. And yeah, I think that's it. Anything else you want to promote, Max?
That's it. That's all I got. Till next time, Dylan.
Flexibility.
It's the key to air power. See you guys.
See ya.
Rock on.